Some people would rather die than admit they're wrong. 5 ordinary situations turned deadly when the need to prove a point became more important than staying alive. These true stories show what happens when being right matters more than being safe. It was August 15, 2016, at a public marina in Erie, Pennsylvania. The morning was humid with the smell of diesel fuel and dead fish. Helen Garrison was 59 years old and had been dealing with her late husband's boat since his death. She never wanted to own one, but when her husband Robert died of a heart attack 2 years earlier, she inherited his 28-foot fishing vessel, along with monthly marina fees that kept draining her savings account. She had been trying to sell it ever since, but every potential buyer found something wrong with the engine, the hull, or the electronics. The marina was Robert's second home for 15 years. He knew every dock worker by name and always got slip B12 right near the main walkway. Helen felt she deserved the same respect, but the marina manager had other ideas. Temperatures reached 85 degrees Fahrenheit by 10 a.m. Helen arrived already frustrated after spending the previous night arguing with Robert's brother about whether to keep paying the insurance premiums. She marched straight to the dock office and demanded slip B12. The young dock worker, barely out of high school, explained that B12 was occupied and offered her C7 instead. Helen's voice carried across the water as she demanded to speak to the marina manager immediately. She insisted that as Robert's widow, she had inherited his status and deserved automatic priority over newer customers who didn't understand marina hierarchy. For 10 minutes, she paced the dock while other boat owners watched nervously. She made sure everyone within earshot knew that she would be contacting the local marina association about discriminatory treatment. Helen interrupted the dock worker repeatedly, declaring that she knew her rights as a paying customer and wouldn't be treated like some random walk-in. During her rant, she nearly tripped over a dock cleat while gesturing wildly. She also ignored a yellow warning sign about wet dock conditions that had been placed near the slip area after the morning cleaning. When a family with children walked past, she stopped them directly and demanded to know why unsupervised minors were allowed in what she called a professional maritime facility. The parents quickly gathered their children and hurried away from the confrontation. Marina docks become particularly dangerous when large vessels create wake conditions. The combination of moving boats and shifting water can cause vessels to move unpredictably, creating crush hazards for anyone standing between them. Around 10:30 a.m., a 45-foot cabin cruiser entered the Marina Channel moving faster than the posted 5-mile-per-hour speed limit. The wake from the large vessel spread outward in all directions, causing every boat in the marina to rock back and forth. Helen was making one final demand about getting slip B12 when the wake reached the dock area. She had stepped onto the narrow finger pier between 2 boats, leaning in and pointing aggressively at the premium location to emphasize her point about proper customer treatment. The dock worker shouted a warning, but Helen was too focused on her argument to pay attention. The wake hit the dock just as both boats began shifting inward. Helen turned toward the movement as the 2 hulls came together with tremendous force, crushing her instantly. Her scream was cut short as the boats ground together, trapping her body between them while other boaters watched in horror. Several witnesses saw the accident unfold. A man loading fishing gear onto his boat said he heard the impact from 50 feet away. A woman walking her dog on the marina path called 911 immediately. Helen died from massive crush injuries to her chest and abdomen. The coroner estimated she was trapped for less than 30 seconds before other boaters could push the vessels apart, but the damage was already done. The marina implemented new safety protocols requiring staff to establish barrier zones during vessel movements and prohibited pedestrians in active slip areas. Robert's brother sold the boat the following month without ever seeing it. The young dock worker quit 2 weeks later and never worked around water again. The investigation ruled Helen's death accidental due to unsafe positioning during vessel movement. No charges were filed against anyone involved. In Erie, a widow's demand for respect at a marina ended in crushing tragedy. But in Aurora, Illinois, An environmental crusader's passion for proper recycling would lead to an equally fatal confrontation with city workers. It was February 12, 2018, at a residential alley in Aurora, Illinois. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees Fahrenheit with brutal wind chill that made the air feel like knives. Catherine Stone was 34 years old and worked as an environmental compliance officer for the city. She lived with her girlfriend Marina, who often complained about Catherine's obsessive recycling habits. Co-workers described her as extremely detail-oriented and passionate about environmental regulations, sometimes to an obsessive degree. She had a reputation for being inflexible about rules and procedures, often clashing with colleagues who took shortcuts. Her job as an environmental compliance officer felt like a mission. Every properly sorted recycling bin was a small victory against global destruction. Catherine believed that if everyone just followed the rules, the planet could be saved. That morning, Catherine was already running late for work. She had spent 20 minutes resorting her elderly neighbor's recycling bin, separating the plastics from the paper and removing items that didn't belong. She muttered about people who didn't care if the world burned while they slept. The sanitation truck arrived at 7:30 a.m., right on schedule. Catherine watched from her kitchen window as the crew began their route. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop. The workers were dumping recyclables directly into the same compartment as regular trash. Catherine appeared visibly upset. This was exactly the kind of system failure that kept her awake at night. She grabbed her phone to document the violation and rushed outside without putting on proper winter gear. The diesel engine rumbled loudly in the quiet neighborhood. Catherine's breath formed angry clouds as she confronted the crew. She shouted about destroying the entire recycling program and demanded they understand the environmental impact. Her voice became strained as she spoke. The workers tried to explain contamination rules. When recycling bins contain too much non-recyclable material, they have to treat the entire load as regular trash. But Catherine saw only willful destruction of everything she worked for. She pulled out her phone to photograph what she called illegal dumping for her official report. The crew supervisor tried to calm her down, but Catherine was beyond reasoning. She had seen the enemy, and it was wearing city uniforms. Sanitation trucks have significant blind spots, especially when backing up in residential areas. The combination of large mirrors covered in frost, engine noise, and early morning darkness creates dangerous conditions. Most truck-related pedestrian accidents occur when people position themselves in these blind zones during vehicle operations. The truck driver, an experienced operator, had limited visibility due to frost covering his mirrors. Catherine's winter coat blended into the gray morning light and drifting exhaust as frost clouded the truck's mirrors. When he started backing up to the next stop, he followed his normal routine of checking mirrors and listening for his crew. But Catherine had moved from the side of the alley into the narrow blind zone directly behind the truck, still documenting what she called illegal dumping and waving her arms to get the supervisor's attention. A neighbor across the street saw what was happening and screamed a warning, but the diesel engine drowned out her voice. Catherine never heard the backup beeper over her own yelling. She was focused entirely on confronting what she believed was the systematic destruction of the planet's future. The truck struck Catherine and dragged her several feet before the driver realized what had happened. Neighbors watched in horror as she screamed in pain while being pulled along the icy pavement. She drifted in and out of consciousness for several minutes, moaning as paramedics worked frantically to save her. Catherine died from massive internal trauma and multiple broken bones. Witnesses said she continued arguing about recycling procedures even as paramedics arrived. The sanitation company conducted a safety review and started retrofitting their trucks with backup cameras, beginning with the residential routes. The investigation closed the case as accidental death with no criminal charges. The driver was cleared due to limited visibility conditions and pedestrian error in a vehicle operation zone. In Aurora, an environmental officer's fight to save the planet ended when she stepped behind the very truck she was trying to stop. But in Mesa, Arizona, a former swimming coach's obsession with pool safety would create the exact danger she spent years trying to prevent. It was July 23, 2017, at a community aquatic center in Mesa, Arizona. The temperature had already hit 118 degrees Fahrenheit by 2 p.m., and the concrete pool deck was hot enough to burn bare feet. Sandra Mitchell was 51 years old and worked processing insurance claims after a shoulder injury ended her 15-year swimming coaching career. She was married with 2 teenage children who were embarrassed by her habit of correcting other people's behavior in public. The aquatic center remained her sanctuary, the one place where she still felt like an expert, much to her family's frustration. The pool was more crowded than usual because the community center's air conditioning had broken down, driving everyone to the water. Chlorine fumes hung thick in the motionless air. Parents packed the deck chairs while kids splashed in every available space. Sandra's prescription sunglasses kept fogging up in the humidity, forcing her to squint and adding to her irritation. She had already corrected 3 lifeguards on their technique and lectured a mother about proper swim diaper requirements. The mother had tried to explain that her child was potty trained, but Sandra insisted that pool regulations were non-negotiable regardless of individual circumstances. Swimming had been Sandra's life for decades. She knew every safety rule by heart and had seen too many accidents caused by careless behavior. The pool deck was her biggest concern. Wet concrete plus running kids equaled disaster. Sandra had spent the first hour making her rounds like an unofficial supervisor. She approached a father teaching his young son to swim and informed him that his technique was wrong and potentially dangerous. When the man politely declined her advice, Sandra loudly announced that she had 15 years of coaching experience. She then confronted a group of preteen girls sitting on the pool edge with their feet in the water. Sandra explained that this violated safety protocols and demanded they move to designated seating areas. When a lifeguard took a brief break, Sandra approached the guard station and pointed out several safety violations she had observed, suggesting they needed additional training. Around 2:30 p.m., Sandra spotted a group of teenagers running along the pool's edge. They were playing some kind of tag game, laughing and chasing each other across the slippery surface. This was the final straw for Sandra's coaching instincts. She shouted that this was exactly how accidents happen. The teens ignored her completely, which only made her angrier. She had spent years teaching water safety, and these kids were treating the pool like a playground. Sandra stood up from her chair and started walking toward the teenagers. Her rubber-soled sandals squeaked on the wet concrete as she moved. She was focused entirely on stopping the dangerous behavior before someone got hurt. In her focus on the running teenagers, she forgot her own cardinal rule about pool deck safety. She was moving too fast on a slick surface while gesturing angrily at the kids. Near the deep end, someone had spilled sunscreen on the deck. The oily lotion mixed with pool water created an invisible slick spot. Sandra's foot hit the mixture just as she was pointing at the running teens and shouting about proper pool behavior. Sandra fell backward, first striking the sharp pool edge with her ribs before bouncing off and hitting the concrete deck with her head. She remained conscious but unable to move, lying motionless on the deck as lifeguards rushed toward her. Children began screaming as lifeguards cleared the area. Sandra showed signs of severe head trauma and struggled to breathe as help arrived. Lifeguards initiated emergency response procedures, but she remained unresponsive and showed signs of catastrophic brain injury. Sandra died from massive head trauma and internal bleeding as the horrified crowd gathered around her. The aquatic center installed non-slip coating on all deck surfaces within 6 months. They also doubled the number of safety signs around the pool area. A memorial plaque near the entrance later honored Sandra's 15 years of youth coaching, though it made no mention of how she died. The investigation determined the death was an accidental slip and fall. The facility was found not liable due to posted safety warnings and multiple witness accounts of the victim's unsafe behavior on the wet deck. We've got 2 more deadly stories coming up. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens when a consumer advocate's hunger proves fatal. and how a rule enforcer's determination to document violations takes her beyond all safety barriers. It was October 14th, 2015, at a weekend farmers market in Santa Rosa, California. The morning air was cool and dry, with temperatures in the mid-60s Fahrenheit. Clear skies and a seasonal harvest festival had drawn larger than usual crowds into the narrow walkways between vendor stalls. Eleanor Blackwood was 68 years old and recently retired after managing a high-end department store for more than 3 decades. In retirement, she stayed busy through her neighborhood association and a local consumer advocacy group, where she focused on what she described as protecting customers from unsafe or unethical business practices. Friends said Eleanor believed strongly in accountability, but often escalated minor issues into public confrontations. She arrived at the market carrying a folder of expired coupons and a handwritten notebook listing what she called common vendor violations. Eleanor had skipped breakfast that morning, intent on completing her inspection rounds before stopping to eat. By the time she entered the market, she was already irritable and vocal about what she viewed as poor crowd control and sloppy stall layouts. As the morning progressed, Eleanor confronted several vendors. She criticized labeling at a honey stand, challenged a produce seller about washing procedures, and demanded to speak with a market volunteer about stall spacing. Witnesses later said her tone was loud and dismissive, drawing attention as she moved through the crowd. Around 10:30 a.m., Eleanor approached an artisanal bakery stall operated by a young couple offering sourdough bread samples on toothpicks. Their setup included posted ingredient lists and standard food service tools. Eleanor immediately began questioning their sampling practices, arguing that portion sizes were inconsistent and wasteful. The vendors attempted to explain, but Eleanor continued lecturing them about consumer standards and efficiency. While speaking, Eleanor noticed several customers selecting larger samples. Hungry and still agitated, she took one of the thicker pieces herself, remarking that she would demonstrate the problem firsthand. She placed the sample into her mouth and continued talking without pausing to chew. The dense sourdough proved more difficult to swallow than expected. As Eleanor attempted to speak mid-bite, the bread lodged in her throat. She stopped talking abruptly and raised a hand to her neck. At first, nearby vendors assumed she was coughing, but within seconds it was clear she was in distress. Eleanor attempted to wave off assistance, shaking her head when the bakery staff asked if she needed help. She stepped backward into the aisle, clutching her throat as her breathing became strained. Several customers recognized the choking gesture and shouted for help. A retired paramedic in the crowd moved toward Eleanor and attempted to assist. Witnesses reported that Eleanor resisted briefly, pushing his hands away in apparent panic. Moments later, she lost strength and collapsed to the ground. Emergency responders were called immediately. Eleanor lost consciousness before paramedics arrived. Despite rapid intervention, she could not be revived. She was pronounced dead at the scene from airway obstruction caused by choking on a food sample. The market was temporarily shut down as authorities cleared the area. Many attendees were visibly shaken by how quickly the incident unfolded. The bakery vendors cooperated fully with investigators and were later cleared of any wrongdoing. The investigation determined Eleanor's death was accidental. Witness accounts confirmed that assistance had been offered promptly and that Eleanor initially declined help. No violations were found in the bakery's food handling practices, and no charges were filed. Eleanor's family requested privacy and declined public comment. The farmers market resumed operations the following weekend with no changes to sampling procedures, though vendors were reminded to monitor customer safety closely during crowded events. In Santa Rosa, a consumer advocate's hunger and need to prove a point led to a fatal choking incident. But on the California coast, a permit investigator's determination to document violations would take her beyond all safety barriers. It was May 19, 2018, at a coastal trail overlook in Big Sur, California. The temperature was in the low 70s with light ocean breezes, creating perfect conditions for hiking and photography. Vivian Sterling was 38 years old and worked as a paralegal at a local law firm. She was married to David, who often apologized to neighbors for her confrontational behavior. She served on 3 neighborhood committees and had a reputation for filing more complaints with city authorities than anyone else in her district. Vivian had received an anonymous tip about illegal construction happening near the coastal preserve. Someone was allegedly building without proper permits in an environmentally sensitive area. She'd spent weeks researching property records and environmental regulations, building what she called an airtight case against the violators. The coastal trail was packed with tourists, but Vivian wasn't there for sightseeing. She carried a professional camera and a folder of property maps, determined to document what she believed was a clear violation of coastal protection laws. She had been hiking for nearly 2 hours, stopping frequently to check her maps and take reference photos. During her trek, Vivian confronted a family whose children were running off the designated trail, lecturing the parents about environmental damage and safety regulations. She also stopped a group of teenagers who were being too loud, explaining that this was a nature preserve requiring respectful behavior. When she encountered a dog owner whose pet was off-leash, Vivian demanded immediate compliance with leash laws and threatened to report the violation to park authorities. The owner quickly leashed the dog and moved away, but Vivian continued shouting about irresponsible pet ownership. The standard viewpoints didn't provide clear sightlines to the construction area. She needed definitive photographic proof to present to the Coastal Commission. The May weather was deceptively calm, but park rangers had posted multiple warnings about unstable cliff edges. Recent rains had eroded the sandstone formations, making areas that looked solid actually quite dangerous. Safety barriers marked the restricted zones. Around 3 p.m., she reached the main overlook where the construction site was partially visible in the distance. Vivian looked at the scene and appeared dissatisfied. The angle wasn't clear enough to definitively prove the violations. She needed a better vantage point to capture clear proof. The restricted area beyond the safety barriers offered a much clearer view of the suspected illegal construction. The cliff edge dropped 200 feet straight down to jagged rocks, where waves crashed constantly. Park rangers had specifically closed this section after recent ground surveys identified significant erosion hazards. Vivian studied her property maps and determined that the restricted area would provide the perfect angle to photograph the violations. She ducked under the safety rope while keeping her camera ready. Other hikers called out to her not to go beyond the barriers, but Vivian dismissed them as people who didn't understand the importance of environmental protection. The unstable ground beneath her boots shifted as she moved closer to the cliff edge. She was focused entirely on her camera viewfinder, adjusting her position to get the perfect shot of what she believed was illegal construction. Vivian announced to nearby hikers that she was gathering evidence to protect the coastline from illegal development. She took several steps closer to the edge to get a clearer shot of the construction site, ignoring the continued shouts from other hikers. The sandstone gave way without warning. Witnesses saw the ground collapse beneath her feet as she lost her balance. Her camera fell with her, capturing nothing but sky and rocks as both plummeted toward the ocean below. Multiple hikers called 911 immediately. Investigation later revealed that the suspected illegal construction was actually a permitted restoration project, clearly marked with proper signage that would have been visible from the legal viewing areas. Vivian died from multiple traumatic injuries after falling 200 feet onto the rocks below. Emergency responders recovered her body several days later when conditions permitted safe recovery operations. The Park Service installed additional barriers and expanded warning signage around restricted cliff areas. Warning signs now specifically mention that enforcement activities should be reported to proper authorities rather than investigated by civilians. The investigation closed the case as accidental death due to reckless behavior beyond safety barriers. Vivian's family chose not to pursue any legal action against the Park Service, acknowledging that she had deliberately ignored posted warnings. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.